100 years ago, when we look at radio frequency energy, we had virtually nothing in the background, although 1/50th of the natural background radiation is enough to influence behavior, according to some of the work that's been done at Yale and other institutions. But today we have 200 million times more radio frequency energy alone surrounding us, and just from its various sources. You think about all the other electromagnetic fields that surround us, and they create not just a huge underlying stress, but in certain environments they have a higher impact than others. You know, I've taken a device around when I've traveled to measure just electromagnetic fields within, like, hotel rooms and the airplane and all the different places that you are, and you'd be amazed at what you see that you don't see. Just for instance, on an airplane flight, if you take a radiation detector, which they might look at you strangely these days.
Yeah, can you even bring one on?
I don't know if you can anymore. But
not a radiation detector, Nick.
Right. But
oh, no.
I've done it, and on the way up, what happens is it starts at about 20 rads a minute, in the background radiation. Then by the time you get up to about 30,000 feet, you're running about 700 rads. And most people don't realize that, you're getting exposed to, a fair amount of radiation of that particular type. And imagine taking a look at sort of cancer rates among stewardesses and pilots, people who log a lot of time in the air, and I think you might find an interesting correlation. But you don't see it. The same is true with radio waves. You don't see them. You think about sound waves as an example. Sound as a concept. We hear between 300 and about 24,000 hertz or vibrations per second. That's it. A dolphin hears up to 250,000, 10 times the range. Does that mean the sound's not there? The sound's there. We just can't perceive it because our instrument isn't tuned to that range, if you think about it in that way. And when you look at sort of the interaction between mind and what we maybe call this anomalous capability, once again, is really just a different range of signal transmission that we can, in fact, perceive. And that's really as simple as I think it probably gets. And when you look at, some of the things that have shown up in the literature about what really underlies so much of what we are as human beings, if you look at the science of acupuncture, you look at what it entails in terms of energy balancing within the body, you look at the fact that we're all interconnected on a very basic kind of level, and we influence our outcomes. We can, the observer affects the particle or the wave.
And we influence them all the time, Nick. We'll be back with more questions with Nick Begich. Then next hour, ESP stories from you while Nick reacts. And welcome back. We've got Nick Begich, your final calls. Nick, where do you get the books and the DVDs?
From the website is a good place to start, earthpulse.com, and I also have a toll-free number if I can give that.
Please.
It's 888-690-1277. Again, that's 888-690-1277, and we'll send out a free catalog for anyone who's interested.
Okay, let's go to the phones. Wild card line. Hey, Phil, go ahead.
Hey, this is Phil. Well, you got another trucker sitting out here in Colorado.
I love it. Thanks, Phil.
I'll tell you, I love it, too. I'm thrilled. And my friend Dave and Mike and Will, they're going to kill me because I got through and they didn't. we all run at night together. George and Nick, it's an honor. All the stuff you've been talking about tonight, it really hits home. And, George, right before the break, you asked the question, do you know that somebody that's been really mind-controlled? And my first thought to your question was, every single one of us.
You're right. You're right.
And the reason being, it started with your mother. She looked at you wrong when you were a kid, and whoops, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
But with all these fears, and I think you really nailed it on the head. Even FDR said it. He was corrupt in a lot of respects, too. That we fear ourselves. What kind of a change, or what kind of, I don't know, whatever word you want to use, what would it take to change us as a world population from a fear-based people to a positive, to do what you're doing? Because I've had the experience. If I'm not fear-based, I'm more open and free to think.
Right. You know, I think it's about all of that. It's the starting point is recognizing, I think, ultimately that we're not powerless. We're quite the opposite, each and every one of us. And there are no, you know, we think of things in terms of scale, big things, little things, and there really are no small things, because some of the most interesting things that have ever happened, we would have called small things. But I think we need to recognize our own potency as individuals and begin sort of stepping into what we can do, not what we believe we can't do, because each of us has a sphere of influence, and it might be the circle of friends that you just mentioned that didn't get through tonight. But, you know, whatever our spheres of influence are, we should begin expressing ourselves in more constructive ways within them, and guess what? The next thing shows itself. And it's amazing who carries the ball. And the only requirement, I think, is people need to make honest effort in furtherance of what they believe to be right and true, and only do the things you know you can accomplish, because there's no point in doing the impossible. Leave that for the other guy who it's not impossible for. And I think if we start to recognize it, you know, this connection that I was mentioning in one of the earlier hours, we don't need an artificial connection to one another, a synthetic mind internet like what was predicted on PBS. We already have that in the sense of a organic, what I call the organic internet. It's who you and I are. And each of us, if we just do something in furtherance of what we believe in, I think we make a difference. And I think the cumulative effect of that can be just as earth-changing as what we've been experiencing under really a fear model. And I don't care where you go on the planet, people are afraid, and yet we ought to be looking around saying, how do we solve these problems so that we can look towards an abundant future, which I think is absolutely possible on this planet today.
You know, Nick, the other thing is they want us to stay under a fear-based society. Worldwide, they don't want us to think clearly. Again, 10 years ago, I would have said that's nonsense, but not anymore.
Right. I think most people would agree at this point, just watching sort of how things unfold. And at the same time, when we start to look at each of these problems, you know, and if you start to say, okay, what are the big problems? And they're not being faced up to, you know, energy. Anybody who is anybody is experiencing that pain, you know, whether you're paying the heat bill or the air conditioning bill, and driving your car, whatever you're doing. And energy ought to be a national emergency, and the fact is we should be headed the other direction. The alternatives now make all kinds of sense, and they're getting more efficient all the time, to the point where energy costs should be going the opposite direction. And we have no national policy or international policy along that line. And if you solve energy, then you solve refrigeration, then you solve a lot of the problems associated with food, distribution. I mean, there's a lot of things that if they were a little more important on the scale because they do affect us, and a little less important to Wall Street, we would have a whole different situation occur. And I think that's where, you know, we're giving incentives still to oil companies, for goodness sake. And it's not like they're not making enough money as it is. The alternatives to solve each and every one of our problems, I think, is already here. We just have to redirect the way we're looking at that. And there's people that listen from all walks of life that have lots to contribute to change. And I think conscious efforts should be made, and there ought to be a way to root out the nonsense, better ways of accountability at a time when so much is at stake as technology advances.
Let's go to our first-time caller line. We've got Doreen in South Carolina. You're on the air with us. Hi, Doreen.
Hi, George. First, I got to tell you, I thank you so much for Children International. It's been going on 3 years for me, and it's been the most rewarding thing my husband and I have ever done.
Well, you are welcome, and thank you for participating.
I really do. He had mentioned earlier about hearing something in a different language, and I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, and later there became an influx of Arabic people with just great food. Well, I got to know this butcher, and I would go in, and he was a little sweet on me, and he would cut meat off the spine for me to go ahead and have shish kebab. Well, I'm in there one day, and his father's behind the counter, and I asked him, I said, may I taste some? And I pick up the raw meat, and I eat it. And the father says, I've never seen an American woman eat raw meat. And I said, that's the way it tastes best. And they looked at me, and they said, you speak Arabic? I said, no. I just heard what he said.
That store wouldn't be on Warren Road, would it?
Yes, it was.
Now,
In fact, it was on Warren and Jonathan.
Yep, because you know, I grew up as a kid in that area.
Oh, maybe we crossed paths.
What high school did you go to?